Tonight on WVW Broadcast Network News, does Iran have sleeper cells in the United States of America? Well, there's been a congressional hearing that says that is just the case. What do you need to know? My guest tonight is Claire Lopez with the Center for Security Policy. The WVW Broadcast Network News broadcast begins right now.
This is WVW Broadcast Network News and Commentary with Brannon and Howse.
Good evening and welcome to the program. Glad you are with us. We're joined tonight by one of our favorites, Claire Lopez. She is a Senior Vice President of the Center for Security Policy, and she is one of the ones that puts out those great occasional papers you'll find on their website. The short URL for their website is securefreedom.org, securefreedom.org. She joins us tonight to talk about the threat from Iran. Well, here we are in May of 2019 broadcasting, and we know that America is, in a little skirmish here with Iran, moving warships and other resources into the Middle East. America is. And, most folks are thinking, well, they're over there. But reality is, they may have sleeper cells right here. Here's a headline from Front Page Mag not too long ago. Congressional hearing, Iran sleeper cells threaten the U.S. Here's another headline. Iranian-backed sleeper cell militants hibernating in U.S. positioned for attack. And joining me, as I said, is Claire Lopez. Claire, thank you so much for making time for us tonight.
Always glad to be with you, Brannon.
Explain the connection between Iran and Hezbollah, for those who maybe don't know.
Sure. So the current Iranian regime, and I really want to separate the regime from the people of Iran, but the Iranian regime in power since the 1979 revolution that overthrew the Shah is dedicated per its own constitution, which, by the way, is available in English online, dedicated in that constitution to global jihad in order to establish an Islamic state over all the world under rule of Islamic law, or Sharia. That's in its constitution. And so the activity of this regime ever since 1979 has been dedicated to that objective. They are true jihadis. They are true, I don't know about how devout, but Muslims who obey the commands of the Sharia to fight jihad and establish Islamic law the world over. And so the way we see the Iranian regime operating especially is through proxies. And one of the first proxy Shiite militias that it set up right after or soon after the 1979 revolution was Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, where there's a population of Shiite Muslims also. Now you notice that I pronounce that word, and I also spell it this way, Hezbollah. The reason is that in Arabic, the first part of that word, Hizb, means party, Allah, of God, Hezbollah. And if you pronounce it or write it any other way, you lose that meaning. They believe Iran and Hezbollah, which is its directly owned sub-unit with allegiance and a chain of command that goes straight to the supreme leader from Hezbollah, from the Secretary General there, Hassan Nasrallah. They believe that they are acting in the will of the divine. They think that they are doing this at the will of God himself. So Hezbollah does have to be understood as a wholly owned subsidiary of the Iranian regime. The chain of command, as I said, goes straight up basically through the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, and its subunit called Quds Force, commanded by a very powerful general, Iranian general by the name of Qasem Soleimani, and then from there directly to the supreme leader, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei himself. Now the thing about Hezbollah is that although it began and its headquarters is in Beirut and in southern Lebanon, really it owns the entirety of Lebanon now, but has expanded all over the world. And that is at the behest of Iran. Hezbollah is here in the Western Hemisphere, South, Central, and North America, because Iran wants it to be, orders it to be, and directs its activities in this hemisphere. And so it's a very direct relationship. It is a direct command and control from Hezbollah up to the supreme leader in Tehran, the Ayatollah Khamenei.
Where particularly do we know Hezbollah agents of Iran are? We know they're in Venezuela, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Now, when the horrific Lebanese civil war between 1975 and 1990 sent many Lebanese fleeing to escape it, a lot of them came to South America. Among that flow in the 1980s, at least, and onwards, were many members of Hezbollah, operatives of Hezbollah. They came first to South America, and they came to a place called the Tri-Border Area, which is a place where the borders of Brazil and Argentina and Paraguay all touch, and it's just poorly policed. There's not much security there, and even before Hezbollah arrived, it was a place for drug trafficking, car theft, contraband, peddling, and all sorts of criminality. But that made it a very ideal landing zone, if you will, foothold for Hezbollah. And that's where they really began, in South America. But then they moved northward. And especially during the time between 2005 and 2013, when the presidents of Iran, at that time it was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and the president of Venezuela, then it was Hugo Chavez, overlapped, their tenures overlapped, a strong relationship was established between the Iranian regime and the Venezuelan regime.
So what concerns should we have when it comes to the connection between the thousands of so-called migrants surging up from Central America and Venezuela and Iran and Hezbollah?
Well, because Hezbollah and Iran got such a strong foothold in Venezuela, meaning businesses, companies, certainly in the government, obviously throughout the entire country, in the Iranian diplomatic facilities, embassy, consulates, as well as mosques and Islamic centers. They were well positioned in the northernmost country of South America, which is Venezuela, to look northward. They looked both northward and other directions too, but they looked northward to the United States because we are the primary target. We are the target for the narco trafficking. We're the target for human trafficking also, which has become a hugely profitable business for many of various kinds of human trafficking criminals. But Hezbollah is involved, and according to at least some, for example, senior officials in Guatemala, a Central American country, Venezuela's leadership has helped to actually fund some of the migrant flow upwards, not from Venezuela, but from Central America is the origin of most of the flow that we're seeing now come up across our southern border. But now, the other part of that is that because Iran and Hezbollah have so many connections, not just to criminals, meaning narco traffickers, and also, of course, terrorists throughout the Middle East, they are in a position to seed that migrant flow with others from other places, countries of concern, we might call them, places in the Middle East, places known for either poor governance, no control over their own territory, and or just sponsors of terrorism. And so the flow of migrants, which basically comes up out of Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, that flow has been full. I mean, many seeded with these other elements, countries of concern, outright terrorists. In fact, with the cooperation of some of these Central American governments, we have shared, the United States government has shared lists from our own terror watch list, And they have found, and they've pulled these people out of the flow. They've actually helped us. They're cooperating. They're overwhelmed, but they're doing their best to help pull these people out. And that's how we know that the flow does include terrorists and people on terror watch lists.
Well, here's a report, April 17, 2018, the House Committee on Homeland Security, Counterterrorism, and Intelligence Subcommittee. So again, folks, this isn't conspiracy. This is coming from the House Committee on Homeland Security, Counterterrorism, and Intelligence Subcommittee. These guys have national security clearances. They're getting information that is not necessarily all open source, okay? Not the daily briefings that you and I receive from the newspaper. They're getting intelligence briefings. And here's what the subcommittee's website posted. Quote, Iran, a state sponsor of terrorism, continues to invest in proxy terrorists and militant organizations that threaten the homeland and U.S. interest and engage in activities that impede U.S. counterterrorism goals. This hearing will examine the trends in Iran's external operations and capabilities and consider the near-term and long-term security implications of Iranian support for Shia militants and terrorist groups operating in the Middle East, Afghanistan, and Latin America, end quote. That's exactly what she was just talking about. One of the people that works for the organization called the Foundation for Defense of Democracies says, quote, before the committee, quote, in recent years, Hezbollah's Latin American networks have also increasingly cooperated with violent drug cartels and criminal syndicates, often with the assistance of local corrupt political elites. Cooperation includes laundering of drug money, arranging multi-shipments of cocaine to the United States and Europe, and directly distributing and selling illicit substances to distant markets. Proceeds from these activities finance Hezbollah's arms procurement. In terror activities overseas, it holds on Lebanon's political system, and it efforts both in Lebanon and overseas to keep Sharia communities loyal to its cause and complicit in its endeavors, end quote. Well, the article in the Washington Beacon declared Iranian-backed sleeper cell militants hibernating in the U.S. poised for attack. FrontPageMag.com, congressional hearing, Iranian sleeper cells threaten the U.S.
The U.S. and Canada share the longest undefended border in the world. There hasn't been a reason to defend it because there hasn't been a serious threat from either country in a couple hundred years. There is now. Canada is today the happy home of thousands of radical Islamists, ex-ISIS fighters, and the Muslim Brotherhood. Their numbers continue to grow, and they've infiltrated the Canadian government on several levels. Many Americans assume that all is peaceful and well with their northern neighbor, but security experts here warn that by welcoming radical Islamists, Canada now presents a danger to the United States. Terrorism expert David Harris, who worked for CSIS, Canada's spy agency, told us a major attack on the United States by Muslim extremists based in Canada is only a matter of time.
Many years ago, I suggested that many of the Islamist extremists might regard Canada as an aircraft carrier from which to maintain operations against the United States.
Canada is becoming a foundational sort of place for Islamists of all stripes, including the Iranians, by the way.
Claire, so I guess there are sleeper cells here operating. What do we know about them, and what are they here to do, and what would awaken these sleeper cells? Or should I ask, who would awaken these sleeper cells, and under what conditions?
Well, I'll give you a couple of very recent examples. And what you just read from those accounts, open source news accounts, is very accurate. So, for example, we talked about Hezbollah being involved in the narco trafficking of the Western Hemisphere. Venezuela has become essentially a narco trafficking state, a narco state at the senior levels of the government. Those drugs, much of that comes out of Colombia, perhaps Bolivia, Peru. Cocaine is part of it. Marijuana is part of it. Traffics north. Hezbollah helps to traffic it north. They link up in Mexico with the Mexican drug cartels, the major names that we've heard for many, many years, like the Zetas or whatever is left of the Sinaloa cartel, the Gulf cartel. And then, not in competition, but in collaboration, Hezbollah is working with these cartels. I think they're probably trading off expertise. For example, we know that there are many tunnels under the U.S.-Mexican border. We know that these tunnels bear a lot of similarity to the kind of tunnels that we see coming across the border into Israel, both from its north, Lebanon, Hezbollah-controlled territory, and from the southern end of Israel, from the Gaza across into Israel. The tunnels under our southern border are very much the same in construction, the concrete lining, the little rail cars that run through them, electricity, all of that, ventilation. So that is going on. But let me get to actual sleeper cells and how this happens. So remember I talked about the way that Hezbollah rode the vector of Lebanese expats or people fleeing the civil war back in those years, but also many have come since that time as well. And they have settled in certain very distinct areas in the United States, for example, around Dearborn or Detroit, Michigan, suburbs of Chicago, Illinois, where there are strong concentrations of Middle East Shiites. Well, those communities are perfect communities in which Hezbollah, again, can hide, can find safe haven, can operate undetected. But sometimes they are detected, and here's a couple of examples. So about 1 year ago, in June of 2018, an individual by the name of Ali Kourani, 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 was arrested in New York City. And I'm mentioning him because his trial has just begun within the past week or so in New York City, where he eventually he was arrested. And it was determined, or at least alleged in this trial now, that he has been a Hezbollah operative since his teenage years, that he was trained by Hezbollah in Lebanon. He was trained in explosives, small arms, secure communications, survival, interrogation. He became a member, allegedly, of Hezbollah's external security organization that is found throughout the Western Hemisphere and the world. That means Hezbollah's terror operational wing, also sometimes called the Islamic Jihad Organization, or sometimes simply just Unit 910. And this individual, Kourani, had been tasked to identify in New York, in the United States, sources of weapons, to obtain the ingredients to make explosives, to research businesses which could serve as fronts and cover for more Hezbollah operatives to operate undercover. These are all the things that are alleged in the trial going on right now with this particular individual who was caught and who is now on trial. But that's just one. Now let me mention another case. And this is a case of a couple of actual Iranians. This Kourani case, he is Hezbollah. He's Lebanese, he's Hezbollah. But let me talk about Iran itself, which operates through, as I said, its IRGC. The Quds Force is a part of that. And then the MOIS, or Ministry of Intelligence and Security. That's Iran's intelligence. It actually is a cabinet ministry, but it's far more than that in the Iranian government. So again, just last year, 2018, 2 individuals were arrested. And they were charged with casing and pre-attack casing and surveillance against Jewish targets, both in Central America and in the United States. Jewish targets like businesses or like individuals, diplomats who may be assigned to Israeli diplomatic facilities, which we have an embassy in Washington, D.C., and consulates around the United States. And they were also charged with pre-attack casing and surveillance that included photography of Iranian dissidents belonging to the Mujahideen-e-Khalq National Council of Resistance of Iran. And in particular, the individuals were charged with following, surveilling, and taking photos of these dissident Iranian opposition groups at an annual rally that takes place outside the United Nations each year in September. during the time of the UN General Assembly. And these two individuals were caught at this before, again, any harm could come to the targets. But this is the kind of operation that's going on right now inside the United States. Two examples, one Hezbollah and one Iran. Both of those, though, the final orders and the chain of command go to the supreme leader and the supreme levels, the top levels of the Iranian regime in Tehran.
On page 263 of the 9/11 Commission report, we have references that concern Al-Qaeda and their sleeper cells that were likely embedded in the United States. So again, this goes back to the 9/11 Commission report, page 263. Here's what we read. Quote, Clark, meaning Richard Clark, Clark mentioned to National Security Advisor Rice, that'd be Condoleezza Rice, at least twice that Al-Qaeda sleeper cells were likely in the United States. In January 2001, Clark forwarded a strategy paper to Rice warning that Al-Qaeda had presence in the United States. He noted that two Al-Qaeda members in the Jordanian cell involved in the Millennium Plot were naturalized U.S. citizens, and that one jihadist suspected in the East African bombings had, quote, informed the FBI that an extensive network of Al-Qaeda sleeper cell agents currently exists in the U.S., end quote. He added that Reza Imam's abortive December 1999 attack revealed Al-Qaeda super porters in the United States. His analysis, however, was based not on new threat reporting, but on past experience, end quote. The report from Front Page Mag says not only did Richard Clark make note of the presence of, quote, sleeper agents, end quote, in the United States, but also that, quote, two key Al-Qaeda members in the Jordanian cell involved the Millennium Plot were naturalized U.S. citizens, end quote. And Front Page says that naturalized citizens have been involved in terror plots illustrates failure of the vetting process and background investigations that by law are supposed to be present when it comes to U.S. citizenship process. So, Claire, you care to comment? I mean, this again is the issue of people flooding into our nation, the push for amnesty, not vetting these people, and yet some of them are U.S. citizens. They become citizens, not to mention just the sleeper cells that are here illegally.
Right. Well, we can take note that just this week, this is May of 2019, President Trump has just unveiled new criteria for vetting of immigrants to emphasize more our need for skills and job qualifications than simply family reunification has been the case in the past. But to your point, let me go back to the 9/11 Commission report because I happen to have been an expert witness in a case called the Howse case about 9/11, which in 2011 concluded with Judge George Daniels in the Southern District of New York ruling from the bench that not only Al-Qaeda, but that Iran and Hezbollah were co-responsible for those attacks of 9/11. So yes, there were Al-Qaeda individuals who were able to get into the United States, and I'll tell you how part of that happened, and it involves Iran. If we go back to the Howse case, we have affidavits that were all made public, by the way. This is all public information and derived from research that was open source as well. But in the year or so, the year of 2000, 2001, right up to before the 9/11 attacks in 2001, September 2001, you had an agreement reached between Saudi Arabia and Iran that the hijackers, who were Saudi, 15 of the 19 were given clean new Saudi passports. Now, if you actually backed up in that 9/11 Commission report about 2 or 3 pages, if I'm not mistaken, 260, 261, you will see reference, I guess maybe depending on the book copy you might have, the print edition, but you will see there reference to the fact that, as they call it, a senior Hezbollah operative, and we know that that would have been Imad Mughniya, senior terror chieftain of Hezbollah for a couple of decades before his assassination in Damascus in February 2008. that senior Hezbollah official actually recruited the Saudi hijackers in Saudi Arabia. You think that happened without Saudi permission at the highest levels? Recruited them, brought them back to Iran for training. They went elsewhere around the Middle East, including Beirut, also to Afghanistan and other places for training, briefing, pre-attack arrangements, had brand new clean Saudi passports, but what would happen when they came across these other borders? So the affidavit of one of our number, Janice Gephardt, in this case, the Havlish case, attested to how Saudi Arabia and Iran reached a deal, an agreement, whereby when the Saudi hijackers came to and across Iranian borders for the training they did inside of Iran, yes, Iranian intelligence acquired jumbo jet 737, 757 simulator trainers in East Asia that they used and trained on inside of Iran. When they came across those borders, there was some kind of a mark, and that is still classified. We don't know what the mark was, but some kind of mark put inside those Saudi passports so that the Iranian border guards were trained to look for it and not stamp their passports. That is how, when those Saudi hijackers finally went to U.S. consulates in Saudi Arabia to get their visas to come into the United States, not only did no one see any kind of stamps from places like Lebanon, Iran, or Afghanistan, they apparently did not have any qualms or suspicions about these fellows coming to the United States at all, and they got their visas. They got legal visas to come into the United States. So it was a combination of, yes, sleeper cells, and as we now know, extensive assistance, what it looks like from the U.S. representation of the Saudi government under then Ambassador Bandar, Prince Bandar, and his family circle, wife, as well as the embassy of Saudi Arabia, which provided assistance to the hijackers.
I think Saddam had, and the Iraqis did have something to do by letting and Iran too, by letting the 9/11 conspirators transit.
You still stick to that conspiracy theory that Iraq was behind 9/11, even though every official report says it's not true.
They let them transit, the terrorists transit through Iran. They wouldn't stamp their passports. They let training occur. Iran was involved, perhaps not in the planning of the operation itself, but in terms of support to the terrorists that brought about 9/11.
Yes, they had. Given the 9/11 Commission report doesn't agree with you, the Senate report doesn't agree.
Yes, it does.
The 9/11 Commission report agrees with you.
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
On 9/11, on Iraqi responsibility.
It does point out there's been transit.
To date, we have seen no evidence that these contacts ever developed into an operational relationship.
Operational is the key word.
So they passed each other in the corridor.
No, it's not just that. There was training support.
I want to ask you a broader question.
There was a number of incidents of support. What there wasn't was operational. What there wasn't was operational cooperation, and that's what I said at the time, what I say now, and that's what that report said. So in saying it doesn't say that, you are not being truthful.
I'm not sure that's true. The 9/11 Commission report says that Iraq and Iran were not behind the 9/11 attacks.
It said operational.
Okay.
So all of this comes together, but it does all have to do with borders. With proper scrutiny. It has to do with proper vetting. It has to do with proper vigilance as to who it is appearing before your window with that passport they want to get a visa in. And unless there is better training of our consular officials, of our State Department officials, Customs and Border Protection as well, Immigration, Customs Enforcement, all of the above, about what is jihad, what does Sharia command the faithful of Islam to do. Unless they get that training, those antennas still aren't going to go up. Even when presented with a clean passport, those antennae weren't there.
And if you don't have elected officials that are taking this seriously, none of that's going to happen. So a lot of this comes back to electing the right kind of members to Congress, the U.S. House of Representatives, to the Senate, to the White House. That's just because, again, most Americans are led to believe that there's some kind of tension now between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and well, there may be on various issues. You just laid out how Saudi Arabia and Iran just work together to come against their common enemy, America. But yet we're kind of led to sometimes believe that there's this, friendship between America and Saudi Arabia, and this hostility between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Everything isn't always as it appears, is it, Claire?
Well, I will say that in the, 18, 19 years since pre-9/11, 9/11, and now, things have changed quite significantly in the Middle East. And what has happened is it's become very obvious to one and all that Iran's regime is driving headlong for a deliverable nuclear weapons capability. Saudi Arabia is very concerned about that, as are other members of the GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, countries like United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and so forth. And also, I think we have to take note that a new and very dynamic young leader, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the son of the King Salman, often called by his nickname or initials MBS, has really shaken things up in the kingdom. Now, does this mean, that Saudi Arabia is no longer dedicated to Islam, jihad, and Sharia? No, it doesn't at all. But what it does mean is that the realities of the Saudi royals' determination to survive against the threats from Iran, as well as their own economic realities, which mean they must attract foreign investment to help them divert away from simply extractive oil and gas industry. All of the above has driven them, and certainly under the leadership of MBS, to different policies. Now, we've seen, of course, that MBS now has allowed cinemas to open and show films to mixed audiences, never allowed before. Women are allowed to drive. Men and women are being allowed to mix openly in places like public cafes. That never happened before. This is not out of the goodness of their Jeffersonian hearts. They don't have any. This is because they must attract foreign investment, which is not going to be very likely to flock to Saudi Arabia if all they see are women being restricted in so many ways, and then chop, chop, square every Friday after prayers, where they do the amputations and the beheadings. That's not conducive to foreign investment. So that's why the changes are happening. And the changes include a relationship with the Trump administration. In particular, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, has formed a personal relationship with MBS. They're of an age, both in their 30s or so. And most, perhaps shocking of all, Saudi Arabia is dealing with Israel. Now, I think tectonic plates have shifted in the Middle East. This does not mean that Saudi Arabia is our ally, our friend, or anything of the sort. It does mean we have an opportunity to take advantage of shifting circumstances to help shape the future relationship of the United States and Saudi Arabia to our benefit and theirs, and to continuously push for more human rights, more and better freedoms for women and so forth.
Claire, does the Iranian regime have a presence inside the U.S., even though they have no embassy or consulate, except at the UN in New York City?
Yes, they absolutely do. And a moment ago, I was talking about the arrest of those two Iranian individuals about a year ago in 2018, who were arrested for allegedly doing pre-attack casing and surveillance against Israeli targets in the United States, and also against the Iranian opposition, the Mujahideen Khalq, or MEK, National Council of Resistance of Iran, NCRI, that annually hold a rally outside the United Nations in New York City in September. of each year. And it was there that they were observed, these two individuals observed taking photographs suspiciously. There's some folks whose CI antenna are up all the time because of not just plots like these here inside the United States, but an uptick, a really significant uptick in attempted plots, thankfully so far disrupted plots across Europe too, by Iranian operatives, some of them operating out of Iranian embassies under diplomatic cover in various places in Europe, for example, Vienna, Austria, where a supposed Iranian diplomat was coordinating a planned attack against, again, the same Iranian dissident presence, MEK-NCRI annual big rally to be held in Paris, France. That was disrupted. So this uptick, I think, is evidence of the pressure against the Iranian regime, both internal, which has to do with their own domestic situation, the very difficult financial situation, in large measure caused calculatedly, deliberately by the Trump administration in imposing more and more sanctions, but also just the Iranian people have had it, up to there with this kind of a regime that is oppressing them, dictating their lives down to what they may wear and not wear, hanging gays from cranes in the middle of town plazas just because Islamic law says that homosexuals must be killed. They've had it. And so uprisings across Iran for at least the last year and more, all of these things combined, plus the external pressure now being applied by the Trump administration since 1 year ago, 2018 in May, pulling out of the nuclear deal with Iran, has really caused causing us to see the fragility of the weakness internally of the Iranian regime. Now's the time to push a little bit harder, but realizing that the real power in Iran is not the mullahs. It is the IRGC, the Quds Force, Basij, and the intelligence service.
So in closing, Claire, America is facing a lot of clear and present dangers. What can we do about it, I guess, is the question for many. And I guess what I'm hearing is, if we're going to address clear and present dangers, we have to have politicians that are willing to understand what they are, identify them, name them, and to identify and name the enemy, and stop being involved in political correctness, shaming those who speak truth about the threats, including Islam, communism, Marxism, globalism, whatever you want to call it, whatever group we're talking about at the time. But if you don't start naming them, defining them, and stop thinking you can somehow cohabitate with them, we're never going to fix the problem. So a lot of this comes back to identifying the clear and present dangers and then electing officials that will acknowledge those dangers and then confront them by throwing out political correctness. Is that true?
That's right. That's absolutely right. And what I hear you saying is that this comes down to the local level. It really comes down to the individual citizen first to be educated, and that involves self-education, an initiative to learn about the issues of the day, the threats that we face. But then secondly, to become engaged citizens. And engaged means certainly voting, being well informed enough about the candidates, both at the local level and the upper levels, meaning, county, state, federal, at each of these levels, to be knowledgeable, to take it upon ourselves as citizens, the responsibility that goes with the right to vote, to learn who the candidates are, maybe to help promote candidates who share the same concerns and the same foundational principles that we all have. That's the job of the individual citizen, and that is why being active and engaged and educated at the local level is so important. And as you say, Brannon, exactly, to get representatives anywhere from the school board, so important with what's going on in our schools today, through city council, on up to state legislature representatives, and then, of course, to the U.S. Congress itself. At every level, it is the citizen because we still do have, a constitutional republic, it is the responsibility of the citizen to shape and to influence the government that we are going to have, that we give the responsibility to. We give the right to that government to be our government, to govern us. We allow that to the government, but along with that is the responsibility for choosing wisely whom that will be, that will be elected up there.
And that includes electing politicians locally, county-wise, who will allow our sheriff deputies, police officers, chief of police to go through training to understand these threats, because when these sleeper cells awaken, that's where they're going to attack, are going to be electric power grid, the physical structure of our grid, water treatment plants, potentially could be schools, it could be malls, it could be Jewish businesses of conservatives. I mean, if they're going to attack, it's generally going to be at a local level, which means your local law enforcement has to understand the threat, know what to look for, and be vigilant. So you have to elect politicians that will untie the hands of the sheriff, untie the hands of the chief of police, so their officers can be trained, correct?
Exactly right. And why that training of local law enforcement is so important too. Because whenever an attack happens, it's going to happen in somebody's community, a local community, for which police departments and sheriff's departments have responsibility. But the other thing that you just said there, Brannon, was, that it's not only knowing what to do in, the indicators and warning of an immediately imminent impending attack, but rather to be educated well enough to see things coming before they get to that last stage of imminence before an attack. And so, that's why the education is so important. It's why local leadership and their education is so important, not just law enforcement, but faith community leaders, civic leaders. We've mentioned city councils and other representatives to school boards. Why that is so critical, that they understand the importance of that education, that the citizens can be supportive of law enforcement and others in recognizing what we would call indicators and warnings long before it comes to the point of the execution of some kind of an attack plot.
Which means Americans have got to stop being involved in just simple pursuit of pleasure. Because hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure, hedonism, entertainment, self-gratification, living in the moment, not prioritizing, not sacrificing, not doing what is the first and foremost function of government, security and protection, is going to get people killed, including their own children and grandchildren, when your emphasis is on more AstroTurf for soccer fields, $1 million on AstroTurf in your community, which happens, or a $100 million high school with a football stadium that rivals that of a Big Ten university. When we're spending our local and city, county money on that kind of thing, not the biggest and best police force, most well-trained, most equipped, biggest security we can get for our schools, to be aware of the threats, when we're spending it on pursuits like $100 million high schools with, as I said, football stadiums that rival that of Big Ten universities, we've got a priority problem that screams entertainment and hedonism, not national security and self-preservation that starts at the local level, correct?
Absolutely. Our priorities have gotten well out of whack in too many ways. We're among the most privileged people on the face of the earth ever to have lived, in that we have an advanced civilization that provides the shelter, the food, the clothing, the basic necessities of life, to the point that we not only have those things taken care of, but we also have extra time left over for leisure. And leisure is important to dedicate to the arts and things like that. But when the pure pursuit of fun dominates lives to the point that little consideration is given for the fact that we do still face existential threats, both without and within this country. When that takes over, then those enemies have the advantage. That they know that we are not alert, we're not aware of what is going on inside our own country. And I'm not even talking only about being aware of potential terrorist plots, of the violent, the kinetic, but I'm talking about the more subtle, the more sophisticated threats of subversion, the kinds of operations, influence operations, information operations conducted not just by the Islamic movement led by the vanguard of the Muslim Brotherhood in this country, but the forces of Marxism, socialism that we have talked about too. And when there is no time left over from the pursuit of games and fun, which have their place, we all need to relax at some point in time, have their place. But when that takes over, all of our disposable time to the exclusion of being educated, being aware, being concerned, and being involved and engaged as citizens, then our priorities are out of whack, and we as a society are going to be at more danger, at more threat.
Absolutely. Price of freedom is eternal vigilance, as it's been said, and the price of freedom isn't more entertainment, hedonism, pursuit of pleasure. It's vigilance, and to be vigilant means you're educated. You know what's going on. You're aware. You're alert. And you're being a watchman that's lifting up a shout. And I guess the question is, are you lifting up a shout in your community? And oftentimes the watchman who is disrupting people's entertainment and pleasure isn't going to be popular. But when they do lift up that shout of warning and the protection comes, they will be appreciated later. So it's not a popular job. It's not a fun job. But people have got to lift up the shout of warning in the local community and encourage their local officials and their local law enforcement to be aware of these threats, because as Claire said, when these attacks come, they're happening in somebody's local community. Claire, again, is a senior vice president there at the Center for Security Policy. The short URL is securefreedom.org, and I urge you to go there and look at their occasional papers. They have fascinating occasional papers right there on their website at securefreedom.org. If you want to get up to speed on many of these issues we've been talking about, there are many of these wonderful white papers that are written there at securefreedom.org. Claire, thank you so much for making time with us and for us today.
And thank you for having me.
My friends, thank you for watching. Till next time, I'm Brannon Howse. Take care.